I have a feeling that sometimes a lot of young designers don't know what they want to do. I think that's the problem. I have a personality, and that's like I don't know if it's a good trait or a bad trait. If I spend a significant amount of time doing something, I feel bad abandoning it. So I would do whatever it takes to finish it. To go into a MoMA design store in New York and seeing your thing there with your name, that felt great. Not gonna lie about that. Sometimes I find myself working on a weekend, kind of redoing a personal image that I've been working for the 10th time and just wanted to finish it and be done with it. And at the same time, I'm thinking like, why am I not on my bike right now?
How do you determine when something is finished, quote unquote, in a sense of getting it to a certain state that you are like happy with?
Can I spend another week on it? I can. Is it going to be much better? Not for me, but for whoever I'm creating it. If the answer is no, then I think it's done. I just came up with it.
Well, design and AI. It's a hot topic these days.
It's a hot and the most boring topic these days. If AI is going to replace all the designer jobs, I guess so. At some point. Not everything needs to be customly designed. Not everything needs a designer as a person with opinion to come and sort it out.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining Product Craft. Today I have a really special guest for you, Anton Repponen. Anton is one of my favorite designers and, in my opinion, one of the best designers out there. He's worked with a range of world-class brands such as Google, Spotify, Netflix, Apple, and a ton more. Anton is a former creative director at Fantasy Interactive. It's a global design agency. And currently Anton is leading design at Anton Irene, a studio out of Brooklyn, New York that he co-founded together with Irene Pereira. In this episode, we covered a range of topics, starting with how Anton got into design in the first place, to his early days at Fantasy Interactive, becoming a global creative director there, talked about productivity and discipline, current state of the design industry, personal projects such as making of the Neuro watch, and really so much more. I enjoyed our conversation so much and hope you will as well. Please like and subscribe. Your support truly matters to me and I'd love to hear your thoughts. So please leave comments and share this episode with your friends and colleagues. Please enjoy. Hey Anton, welcome to Product Craft. It's really good to see you. It's been a while. My motivation to start this podcast originally was to talk with people who have dedicated their lives to the craft of making products in a broad sense, like explore what craft means today, how has it changed over the years. And in my mind, you're one of the ultimate representations of someone who has dedicated their life to the craft and continues to excel, push the limits every day with all the things that you do and learn and put out there. So to start, I wanted to rewind a little bit to the early days. You're from Tallinn, Estonia, and you graduated from Tallinn's College of Engineering as an architect, but you haven't worked professionally as an architect. You had a couple of internships, and then you decided to switch over to design. And if all of that is correct, I was curious to hear a little bit about why did you decide to transition kind of from architecture into design to begin with?
I mean, to be honest, a lot of it was an accident. So I think it's important to understand the context. It's not that I switched to design knowing really, really well what design was, or specifically what interaction design was. And the context is that we're talking about, I graduated school back in 2002, and I lived in Estonia, in Tallinn, as you mentioned. And the reality is that I didn't have a single friend who was a designer. Like most of my friends, most of my classmates, they were pursuing totally different careers, medicine and lawyers and like being in logistics. Also, those were the very early days of interaction design as we know it today. So back at home in Estonia, there were no other place for me to go and study. I knew about schools in Sweden. I knew about some of the schools and some of the programs in the United States. But obviously, I couldn't afford to move somewhere there and actually study. So, and also the digital industry at the time wasn't making as much money as it makes today. So a lot of people in a lot of industries weren't really taking it seriously yet. So it wasn't a discipline that it exists today. So that's the context. It's like, it's not that I was choosing between design or architecture. It's that for me, interaction design that I started doing in early 2000s was more like a hobby. It's like you're doing something, you're launching it online, you're seeing people's reaction. And that seemed amazing and fun to me in comparison to architecture, where it might take years before something actually might get done. So I remember that in my maybe third year of university, I had an architecture internship in Delhi, in India, with this architect, Arun Reval. And almost like in the very first couple of weeks, they realized that I'm a shit architect. Like, I can't do stuff. Like, it's just, I was a horrible intern. Like, it's just, you couldn't give anything to me and actually get something reasonable back. But very quickly, they kind of realized that at that time, I already knew Photoshop. I already knew a little bit of 3D. So all the CAD models that they were designing that looked very primitive in terms of visual language, just like black and white technical drawings, I would actually bring them into 3D and visualize it and add some spy, add some people around, and make a beautiful visualization. And once they realized I can do that, they stopped giving me any technical jobs. They were just giving me, just make this look pretty. And that's what I ended up doing. So in many ways, and then I had my first job at this Finnish company called Gippi, and then I had another job with a bunch of friends building websites. But while I lived in Estonia, I still didn't realize that the design and interaction design is a real job. It felt to me this kind of thing that I can do. People somewhat pay me money to do that, but I did not take it seriously. For me, it was just a thing. And not until I collected my portfolio that at some point got mentioned by designers at this agency called FI, or used to be called Fans Interactive in Sweden, back in 2006, when they invited me to do the interview, and they invited me to move there for a job. And I was kind of considering it. Should I continue living in Estonia? Like, I didn't even plan on moving. And then I thought at some point that, you know what, I'm going to move to Stockholm just for the summer. I'm going to take the job. I'm going to learn from these cool people that do this amazing project. And I'm going to move back to Estonia and just continue living my life. And that's been more than 20 years ago now. I haven't went back. But I remember the first day when I went to the job, when I accepted the job at Fantasy Interactive, I moved to Sweden with just one backpack. And I remember my first job when I walked into the office. I was 21, 22 at that time. It is the first time in my life that I've actually seen people doing digital products or digital projects or digital services, they were called back then, with enormous budgets, with proper meetings, with proper timelines. Like 6 developers building Ford.com, like 4 developers building MTV.com. The designers like trying to kind of figure out how to make it beautiful and user-friendly for standards back at that time. This was the first time I realized that's an actual job. That's a serious job. It wasn't enough for me to see that online. Like, I had to be there in person. I had to see these people. And that's the only moment when it clicked for me. All right, that's actually what I want to do. Like, it looks legit. It looks serious. It's not like this Mickey Mouse show that I was doing back at home in Estonia. Like, it looks serious. And I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to do everything to become good at this. That's only when I realized that it's a real job, and that's what I wanted to do, not for the rest of my life, but for the near future.
So essentially, you were doing it as a hobby. You pretty much were self-taught. Tried a couple of things in Estonia, got noticed by FI, Fantasy Interactive. And then, so what was your process to becoming a better designer? Like, you mentioned that you realized okay, I'm going to do everything that I can to become great at this. Like, how were you doing that?
I would say motivation number 1 is fear to get fired, fear that you're not good enough. And that was a reasonable fear, because I adequately can compare myself and my skills to the skills of other people around me. and they were so much better. And
Mm.
every time we had design reviews, I had several designers. There was one designer in particular that would always say, "Oh, this looks like shit. We have to redo it. Oh, that doesn't look good at all." And getting feedback, even if it was harsh feedback, it was definitely a motivation to become better because I saw myself not being as good as people I'm surrounded with. And it didn't feel that great. Like I wanted to not to become better than them. I wanted to become a peer. I wanted to become similar to them in the skill.
Yeah, I think the important part there is that like receiving harsh criticism made you want to become better. Like some people could actually take it the other way and be like, "Oh, I'm not good enough," and like quit. So obviously that is a great that is a great strength. Do you feel like, are you in general like kind of, is that your kind of mentality overall? Like, okay, if you like something, you're going to do everything that you can to excel.
Not maybe with everything. I think over the years, I realized how, in general, a lot of disciplines and a lot of things are very complex. Like I picked up 3D while COVID, well, since I'm
Hmm.
at home, I might as well spend some time learning that stuff. Like I just know that in order to become really, really good at um, 3D, even modeling or design or rigging or rendering, like that's just like another career in its eternity. And I'm not even planning on exceeding at that. I want to become good enough just so I have an understanding, just so I can apply it in my immediate design tasks. So it's not in everything. I think there are some aspects where I'm fairly dedicated and some aspects for me that I just keep them either a hobby or either just like a learning process or exploration process just for the sake of exploration.
Your 3D work is really great. I mean, it's like, obviously, I know what you mean. Like, it's a whole new world. I mean, not to sound like I'm giving you too many compliments, but like everything that kind of you put out there, it is at a very, very high quality. So like, even though you are beginning in 3D, and like, sure, it's maybe not as advanced as what, Daniel would do,
Sure.
but
Thanks.
but
But also keep in mind that everything that I do in 3D is just a concept, and that's an idea that I come up myself. And obviously, I come up with an idea around the skill set that I have. Give me the brief to make 3D, and I will fail miserably. Give me the
mm,
brief to do a digital products. It doesn't matter which brief. I'm going to solve it one way or another. I'm going to do it because, and that's the difference between the craft that I know and the craft that I just play
yeah.
with.
Yeah. So, kind of back to F5 for a little bit, to Fantasy Interactive. Was I think David Martin, is that the
Yeah,
founder?
yeah,
Yeah.
David.
Um, so was he, back in those days when you started? Was he personally also, like, hands-on doing design, or not really?
Um, no, not really. I think by the time when I started, I don't remember when FI started. I think it's somewhere in the 90s. By the
Hmm.
time when I started in 2006, when I moved to Stockholm, they just opened up another office in New York. So there was a whole group of people already working here in New York, where I am right now. And then there was a whole other team in Stockholm. So he was personally involved a lot in getting clients and talking to clients and even reviewing and giving feedback, not to all projects, but to some of the projects, but not in a way of designing things, in Photoshop, which we used back at that time.
And so eventually you started to lead design at FI, right? You became creative director. Um,
Yeah.
like, how do you remember? Because I mean, I imagine when you just started, as you mentioned, you were still learning. I'm sure that there were other, like, more senior people. Like, how did you transition from the time when you were just individual contributor to starting to lead and manage other people?
It was time when I moved to New York. So I spent 2.5 years working in Sweden. And then I started getting invited to work on projects that were predominantly in New York. And then it would also require me a lot of times to be in meetings here. So I would fly down to New York and back and forth. So at some point, eventually, I did move to New York and continued working for FI from New York office. But there was a very strange moment when at some point, a lot of people left. not simultaneously, but it's just people were kind of leaving. Not a lot of new people were coming in. And I remember a moment when I was there weren't that many designers at the same time. So a lot of senior people left, and I was kind of left the one in New York. And I started getting this request like, hey, Anton, can you help us find new designers? And I would just browse portfolios and contact people. Hey, can you also interview these people? Then I would interview these people. Like, hey, can you also, like, if one of them gets hired, can you also like train them and show them around? And so it just became kind of
Mm.
naturally, and not in a way that I was just growing and overgrowing some of the people that were there. It's just basically at some point there were no one for me to overgrow. And I was just kind of left out doing all those things just pretty much naturally. And because I was young and stupid, I just didn't mind. I was like, yeah, whatever. It's like, you want me to find someone? Sure. You want me to? And I'm pretty sure that I wasn't a great creative director at that time. So I, young and as I was.
Yeah, the management is a whole other thing from from
Exactly.
actually from the execution. Yeah. Um, I don't know if you. I mean, I'm curious if I don't know if you can say like why did people leave? Why did a lot of people leave? Like, was it shortage of work or some just changes?
No, it was just like a natural cause of
Mm.
things. Yeah, nothing bad happened. It's just basically people were, as usually, just getting a job, staying for like a year or two or three, and then getting a better offer somewhere else and just moving along. So it was just basically naturally over time. It ended up with me being more senior, at least in New York, than the other designers.
When I recently talking with some of my friends, designers, like I hear from quite a few people that people are feeling a bit tired and kind of somewhat even frustrated with the industry and kind of like becoming a little bit tired of design and some even really like super talented and seasoned people. I'm curious, like, how do you feel these days? Like, are you still as excited? Like, what's your take on the design these days?
I am super excited, and I don't know, is it a good thing or a bad thing? I know way too many people that were extremely good designers back in the day who hasn't been designing anything for years. They grow into this role of being creative directors or managing larger teams or coaching or everything but hands-on work. And I know a lot of people I know a lot of designers like that. And I'm still the moment I get any project, I'm as excited as I was 10 years ago as I was 20 years ago. The moment I get a brief or the moment we have a client signed, I'm like, yeah, let's go. Let's stir the let's stir the bee nest here. And the reason why I'm saying I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, sometimes I feel that maybe I didn't grow up as a person. It maybe those other people kind of grew up and matured. Maybe they understood something that I didn't understand. So maybe it's a problem. Maybe it's a negative thing that I'm still so excited doing design as a hands-on designer, just like opening files, like starting from scratch, doing research, doing exploration, testing out different things and running it by the client, running it by the teammates, see where we can push it, how we can do it. So I'm still as excited, but I still haven't figured out if it's a good thing or a bad thing.
Hmm. That's interesting you say that. I mean, to me, I mean, you are again like it looks like you're very much deep into the hands-on, like into the craft. You know, you love
Yeah.
it, and I mean, and you did clearly had and still have experience, leading other designers. Like, I'm curious when you lead a team, like when you work with others, are you usually kind of sort of paving the way, or are you able sometimes to sort of step back a little bit and like let the folks start to create and you're more in the kind of supportive like coaching role, like because for myself I feel like I love craft as well. Like, I mean, it changes over the years. I still do hands-on work. There is a lot of things that I appreciate and love. Like, it still makes me feel excited. Like, obviously not everything, but and sometimes it's a question. It's like kind of as a good leader, like sometimes the perception is that you're supposed to kind of step back and like it's all about, you know, the team, letting them create, you know, and you're there to support. Like, how do you like, what I'm curious about your experience there.
I guess there are like two ways to answer this question. One is very direct. To me, I don't believe in one particular type of process. I don't think it works. Even when I was a creative director, or even when I need to manage some people today, it is person by person. There are people that will do the best work if you don't touch them. And then you work with them like this. There are people that need constant mentoring and constant answering questions and constant feedback. And then I would work with them like this. So it's not like there is one method. It really, really depends on the designer. And then also back in the day when I was at FI, there were designers that were better left off. Like I knew they're responsible. I knew they're going to produce the best quality. I knew they're going to make sure the client signs it off and likes it. I knew they're going to keep, innovation in mind. So even if I don't like personally what they do, to me, it was completely irrelevant. I would just let them do it and not even be involved. Like almost like I don't want to talk to them about the project because I know they'll be able to do any of it. But there are also designers that required a lot of hand holding. There were designers in between that, required more frequent check-in. So it is base by base. But the second thing
For,
I'm thinking of,
uh-huh.
oh yeah,
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
the second thing I was thinking about this notion of maturity as becoming a manager, where you manage a lot of people and that are able to produce more work. In my head, it comes from this weird American concept of constant growth. It's like in order to make more money, you need to be growing. And in order to grow, you need to do more work. Therefore, you need this person that, once was a really good designer, but now can actually handle more designers, assuming that more designers will do the work as great as this one person once did, making us more money, making us grow the company. So I'm not like, I don't qualify growth as a success rating in many cases. In some, yes, in some, no. So for me, it was never a goal. For me, the growth isn't like, I'm not sure like how well the quality is scalable over growth. And there are way too many examples where the quality becomes worse and things like that. And it also depends on the person. There are some people that are naturally better managers than their hands-on designers. And I've met people like that in my life. I've met some fantastic creative directors that actually never touched design. To be honest, there were just a few, not a lot. I think most creative directors that never touch design aren't really good, but I did met a handful of them in my life that never designed anything, never had any design training, but they were amazing creative directors to work with. They do exist. But there are also people who are naturally good with just craft, just being deep in the details, like figuring stuff out, and doesn't matter what you do to them, they'll never become successful managers. So people like that also exist. I'm kind of in the middle, but still more towards the craft, still towards like, just
Yeah.
leave me alone. I'm going to figure it out.
Yeah, like with those folks, for example, that you mentioned, that you can like trust them and rely on them to deliver the best work. Like, how important is it for you to feel aligned with whatever outcome that is, if you're part of the team or you're responsible for the delivery?
It's a really good question. And I really think it depends on what do we mean by your team. If I'm an employee at a company X, and company X has its own values, regardless of what my values are, and I need to manage people, then it's one story. Because if some designer does a project that I don't believe it's good quality, but it works, there is a budget, it's approved, it should be done, then I would say, sure, I would let it go. Like, as long as everyone is happy, that's one situation. Because I'm an employee, I do manage the team, but that's not my company. The other situation is that I have a company with my name on it, and whatever works comes out is one way or another is going to be associated with me as a designer, for example. And that would be a different story. So that would be, the alignment needs to be much more there. Like, and I would be much more careful and much more painful in terms of aligning things that come from the studio with my name on it rather than when I'm just a creative director somewhere else.
Yeah. So talking about the studio with your name, you are the co-founder of Anton and Irene. You started that together, and you worked with Irene at FI. Um, you guys are doing great work. Like, I mean,
Thank you.
it's super high quality. I'm curious, how does it feel to be working, for yourself as opposed to part of the agency, smaller size versus a bigger entity?
I mean, there are a lot of things that are different. And obviously, the moment we step outside of craft, where I'm going to be the one sitting and designing things, you have to do much more. Like when I was employed at another company, I didn't have to worry about so many different things. There were producers putting together contracts. There were other producers putting together timelines. I would be involved, like providing the design estimates and scopes and different variations. But the reality, there were so many people responsible for doing other things. There was even a person responsible getting the flight tickets. Like if I need to go for a client meeting. Now, the moment you start your own studio, again, depending on how big it is, depending how much growth you want to have within your studio. But with us, we're still a very small studio, and a lot of things we just still have to do ourselves. From project planning to looking for work, to pitching for work, responding to RFPs, to designing the whole thing, approving the whole thing, building it and testing and maintaining. And it's just like we have to figure this out just by ourselves. So you do add a lot of other things into your workflow than just, sitting and designing or only being concerned with the visual outcome of a product.
I mean, but besides, yeah, like, do you miss some of the, I don't know, benefits of like being part of a larger entity? And I think besides kind of just having, let's say, an accountant or someone to take care of like routine things, like just kind of potentially larger scale, right? Like maybe larger budgets, being able to bring in maybe more people.
The things that you mentioned, not really. A massive client with an insane budget is usually just much more responsibility. So do I miss not getting an insanely big bank coming in and work for me where I could have just worked with three other clients that are a little bit smaller but still cool and kind of maybe make the same amount of budget? So I don't think I miss that. Do I miss a larger organization where in 99% of larger organizations, and the larger they become, the quality goes down and it's just almost undeniable. Like whatever they say, the quality will always go down just because. I also don't miss that because we don't have it. Maybe I do miss some of the things like predictability, meaning that it doesn't really, if I'm employed somewhere, unless I get hired or there is a layoff, there is work for me. Like I'm always going to get that paycheck without going around and looking for work. There is an element of unpredictability of having a small studio because you don't know in advance whether you're going to have a work next year or not. You kind of, it's a much more short-term planning because we're not growing. We're not forced to look for constant work to kind of feed the employees. So maybe that's the only aspect that sometimes I wish things were a little bit more predictable. But other than that, I wouldn't say so.
Yeah, I remember we had like a chat on the side, and I was mentioning that at my current company in an in-house role, I'm working on creating a more mature design organization, like bringing more designers. And I think you said something like, "Oh, like less designers is always better." And I was curious, like, what did you mean by that? In a sense, like, do you lose something like as there is more designers that are part of the team? Like, does it get in a way? I don't know if you can expand.
Sure. There is the best saying. If you want to go fast, you walk alone. If you want to go further, you walk together. Has a trade-off. You get to choose. There is no one way. Um, is it having more and more people and more on a team and more designers will come with certain costs where you would have to spend much more time on organization or much more time documenting things because whatever one designer has in their head needs to be communicated to another 60, for example. You start creating different design libraries. You start figuring out how. So there is a lot of other things, but obviously you can create bigger and maybe potentially more impactful things with a huge group of people. Absolutely, yes. But there are also kind of downsides. Like it's going to take slower. Like you have to get everybody on board. People are going to be leaving. New people are going to be coming in. They have to be retrained. So it's like a big, heavy machinery that very slowly moving, but it's going to move very, very, far away at some point. And obviously, the smaller the team, the faster you can make decisions, the quicker you can test out different possibilities, make specific changes. So the speed is there, but maybe the volume or the amount of work is going to be less. So there is no right or wrong. It's something that you as an organization kind of either choose or try and balance one or the other.
Yeah, the organization definitely, and like in my experience, comes with a lot more overhead in terms of politics, dynamics, just taking time to align everything with everyone. Like I remember, like back in the days when I was running Still Human Studio, I remember like kind of being sometimes surprised, like why is it we can come in and like work like three people from my team and we can do like so much more, so much faster, like in a few months, more than like a 20, 30 people team can do. And I was like, what's going on? And like, there is like, having experienced a lot more of like the actual, like what is going on behind the scenes, so to speak, like in-house, it is almost sometimes surprising that like a lot of companies that we all know, like Apple's and Meta and Instagram and whatever, like have a pretty good baseline of quality. And kind of to your point, I think it does require so many more people. It's kind of like if you want to have higher quality as part of a larger organization, you do not only need to have good talent but also like a lot of them, because like one person will only focus on this area of the product, another person on that area of the product, while at the same time as a smaller team technically you could create a lot more work and cover a lot more ground.
I don't think having an expectation of having a large team that consists of only talented people that will produce really good quality work on a large scale is realistic. I think in this case, I would rather bet on having a really good design director and then having a large group of people. Some of them are talented, some of them are not really, some of them are interns, just it doesn't matter. But if you have an extremely good design director that can make sense of things, that has a vision, that can communicate that vision very clearly and be able um, to kind of manage a large group of people effectively, like I would bet on having a really, really good design director than having an expectation that, you can build a team of 40 insanely talented people. That's just basically not realistic. I mean, there will always be, people are not the same. And people are people. So there are going to be some people who are more, um, not even talented, but maybe in line with what's happening and can catch things fast. And some people might need more time to get on board to kind of understand what's happening.
What's your take on that aspect of collaboration when you do have a lot of people to run things through? Like, I mean, I personally try to kind of strategically approach presentations, and I try to start with a smaller group of stakeholders, get the buy-in and then sort of expand. And I don't know, sometimes I wonder, like maybe I'm paranoid, but like so I try to avoid sometimes like too big of a meeting with when things can start to kind of go in very unpredictable route. I try to kind of manage it a little bit more, have a little bit more control, to have the story unfold. And then once you sort of once you make sure that you understand that things are working out, then you kind of expand it and make it broader out. What's your take on that? Like in terms of presenting when you need to align a lot of people?
No, I mean, it sounds about right. But I also think it really depends on the organization. I think it depends on what the goal actually is. Like, are we inventing something new that nobody has? And then, it starts maybe very, very broad. or maybe there are particular goals and particular tasks that we have. And then you want to start small with a smaller team to set up a direction, to set up a vision, and then you involve other people. I'm not sure I'll be able to tell like what would be the strategy. To me, that would really depend on organization and what are we actually doing here, and like how many people we actually have that needs to be involved. But I think when there is no clear vision that comes either from one person or a tight group of people, that vision that describes what we want to get, and how it should work and how it should feel in general terms. And then others' contribution, whatever people are testing out and whatever people are experimenting with, seeing what fits into that vision and slowly pulling things in. I do think there has to be some kind of like an owner of that vision, be that one person or be that a small group of people. But I don't believe that 100 people can be owner of one vision. I think at some point, again, statistically, it's just impossible for 100 people to be on board. Some people are not going to be understanding what is happening and why certain things are needs to be done. It's just unrealistic in my opinion. So there has to be someone who owns the vision.
So we talk about quality, right? And obviously we believe as designers and people who are like deep in that, we believe that high quality is important. I mean, at least I'm sure that you do. At the same time, like in a world, if we look around, we do start seeing that things are moving towards industrialization, almost like design and product development overall is becoming more like commoditized. Things are becoming more standardized. Like one of the questions I sometimes think about is whether this kind of quality and trying to bring the best thing possible, as we see it, is truly important, like in a big context of things, or is it sometimes more of like our, desire as craftsmen to do that, but kind of the rest of the rest of the world or like the rest of stakeholders maybe don't care about that as much. Like, have you found yourself in conversations where you try to maybe communicate the importance of why something needs to be pushed further to achieve that better quality of experience, as opposed to just saying, oh, okay, this is good enough, like let's just go with that?
It's a huge question, and I don't think it happens now. I think it started to happen almost 100 years ago after World War II, where things had to be standardized to produce a good amount of furniture for people in England who were coming back from war. And that's how there was Bauhaus and the era of trying to find and creating products that are accessible, financially to the people, and creating mass produced items. I mean, we've lived through that with physical objects and, architecture. And now we're kind of trying to live through the same thing again, but in digital space. When it comes to quality, there is a broader kind of concept of quality. I think quality is not black and white. It's not like it's there or it's not there. It's a sum of many, many, many decisions. And a quality in a product is being dictated by quality of so many different things that you do throughout a project that would require you to do. So it's not like the quality is there or it isn't there. The more decisions you make, the more quality things you make in each different segment of a product, the better quality overall you get at the very end. I think I agree with you. Not everything needs to have an extremely good quality. That's the reality. And even when it comes to the digital world, it sounds a little bit sad to me because I want to spend time doing only really good quality thing. But the reality is that not everything needs to have that exceptional bespoke quality. It's almost like how many people that live in a building, in a bespoke building built by a famous architect, such as Zaha Hadid or Rem Koolhaas or Bjarke Ingels. Like, I don't know any. I live in a shitty
Me
apartment
neither.
in Brooklyn, and I don't know any people that live in these bespoke buildings, but it doesn't mean that we don't need them. Like when, those famous architects build those like museums and airports and hospitals and, other architectural structures that where we want to go to a particular city because that building is there. Like we want to visit it. We want to be part of it. We want to take pictures. Like if it's if it's a museum, we want to go to that museum and also be impressed by the architecture itself. The Natural History Museum. I forgot the name of architects that built a new wing here in New York. It's amazing. It's beautiful. I went there, not a big fan of National History Museum, but I did go there because that new wing has been opened. And that's like a bespoke, new, innovative quality architecture, not the type of building that I live in. So there are contexts in which we need good quality thing in digital space. There are contexts where, as you mentioned, or you refer to things like mass production. In my head, those are like different ready to go templates, pre-made components that you can just easily download somewhere and quickly assemble something and just push it live. Things like that also exist. And I think as a designer, like if you have a choice, you get to choose sometimes which things you want to work on. Sometimes when you don't have a choice and you're in need for work, you might end up working on things that are, a little bit more simple from sort of the approach, like you're not trying to reinvent the wheel where you're doing something that doesn't require that. And I think it's very important for designers to understand once they start the project, where that project lies in. It would be pretty stupid if somebody doesn't need a bespoke architecture and you try to shove them a Guggenheim building. It's like, no, no, no. I just need a little kiosk to sell newspaper. Like, I don't need this massive thing. And then the other way around is also bad. There are so many projects that require a really good bespoke design, a really new approach, really something innovative. And instead, you're not even trying, you're just doing like a templated solution without even thinking about that other thing exists. And that exact project actually requires this, not this templatized solution that you just downloaded online in 3 seconds. So it is important for designers to see what requires what and what is more appropriate when, and then approach it accordingly.
It does make me sad as well, like this whole templatization and standardization of things. I understand it's inevitable, and kind of to the people who always think about the bottom line and like how do you make sure that the company with 10,000 people can operate, like you kind of you there is definitely the purpose. I don't know if you would agree or not, like back in the days, kind of from where we started talking about, like those 20 years ago, I feel like there was not as good of, like, digital was still starting out. There were not as many of examples of great websites or products. Products were just starting out, but there were like a collection of smaller studios or individual designers who were doing really great work, and they were almost like lighthouses out there. Everybody would look at, oh look, this is what they did, like let's try this thing. Like, I don't know, I remember that time, maybe also because we were younger, but like there was a sense of kind of discovery and learning something new, like new technologies would come in, new patterns. What are the lighthouses, so to speak, these days? Do they exist, or did we kind of lose them in the sea of standardized UI patterns and all that stuff?
That's a lot of questions, but to answer generally, I don't think we need those lighthouses in one way. I think the design became much more open. There are a couple of things that were happening at that time. We also have to consider context. People weren't making, people in general, like clients and companies, weren't making a lot of money through online businesses. I mean, the amount of money being made offline was still more than online. Things weren't measured. The different patterns and behaviors, whatever innovative things people would do, weren't measured. Like people didn't know whether they performed well or not because they were not really paying much attention. Once digital started to make more money and companies realized, you know what, we can just be a digital only company and generate a big revenue. Let's start measuring things. Let's see how things perform. And that's, was the birth. It was this specific era of A/B testing appearing and the different devices and different techniques and to measure the people's behavior. Obviously, that a lot of it did contribute to creating certain standards. Another thing that I also think why it's good about things becoming more standard. Maybe I'm wrong with it, but I remember back in the day, if you see a Japanese website, you would just, your brain would break because you would have no idea what's happening. If you go to a Brazilian website, it was a completely different world. So the digital spaces around different cultures were also very different at the very beginning. Obviously, a lot of them got aligned much more. Now, on one hand, it's a bad thing. It's like languages are dying and, there is only a handful of languages being remain on the planet. And then there are people who study these old languages. So there's this concept where a beautiful local tradition kind of died out and replaced by something that's more standardized. It's a negative side of things. But on the positive side, if you look at, for example, the App Store top downloaded apps in Japan, you would see things like Instagram, you would see things like TikTok, WhatsApp. So you understand now if you're designing a messaging app in this sort of standards, people in Japan will be able to use it. People in Brazil will be that you actually can now create something that's more or less universal. Because before it wasn't like that. Before, the interfaces were completely different and you could not rely on one thing. So it is good and bad, and it depends on
So
how
it's
you
more
look at it.
more accessible in some way, kind of
And
the
the last thing,
Yeah,
none of that was accessible, of course. Like that stuff, like
yeah,
if we talk about accessibility and how, people with different disabilities and visual impairments can browse digital space, don't, I mean, none of it was accessible. It was like back in
yeah,
Flash. So, and today things need to be built in a certain way that more people have access to the same experience. So there are good things that we lost and there are bad things there are bad things and good things, so it depends
yeah,
on
yeah. I
how
guess
you
it's
look
like
at it.
more globalized. In the McDonald's is going to look the same in Spain or in Japan, more or less. Actually, I heard that in France they have somewhere different McDonald's, but I
Yeah,
haven't been.
sure. And at the same
Yeah.
time you have like bespoke food, like, right, like you do have a Japanese food that will be next door to McDonald's that you can experience that you won't be able to experience somewhere else. So at least you do have some kind of a choice. Not sure what will be in the future, but for now.
Are you encountering the need to work within a certain amount of constraints? I mean, I know like we always have constraints, but I mean like specifically, oh, like let's make sure to use this, UI framework. Like let's make sure to use materials UI or like whatever. Do you encounter those situations, and like how does it feel, and what do you do in those cases? Or do you find opportunities to like create more of the custom things still?
We do encounter things like that, not specifically to like, let's use, you know, Android OS design system or something like this, like not so straightforward. But sometimes there are instances that we have with clients where they would try and do something that's based on best practices, something that they would find enough kind of evidence online to support a particular claim, and then kind of try and navigate us in order to create something like that. That can be either a component or element or navigation or framework, can be anything. In this case, at least my personal approach would be to always do two versions, to do the version that matches exactly what they ask in the first place, regardless of what the best practice is. Like, this is what you wanted. This is what your stated your goal was. And then if they keep demanding, keep requesting, it is always trying to maintain kind of several options as you go through the process. Because usually, at least in my career, once they see something that's made for them customly and something that is a little bit more of a standardized solution, at least sometimes they either going to choose a custom thing, or at least sometimes it might be some kind of blend. Okay, let's at least try to take some from a templatized solution in terms of like maybe position or the way it kind of behaves, but still try and incorporate all these custom elements. So if you only do the first option, they'll always choose it 100%. If you always maintain kind of, okay, this is one direction, there is another direction, and can we maybe find some common ground between, I mean, that's the exploration. That's what every designer needs to do.
Let's say when a client hires you for a product, are you usually involved in working with engineering team, like on the client side, or is that common?
Both, both. We have our own team. A lot of times we work with the client in-house team. A lot of the time, client hires a different development team just to build things and us just to design things. Whatever configuration is, we and me personally would always be working in tandem with the development team.
Yeah, I feel like these days, it probably always has been, but I feel like these days it is critical for a designer to think about implementation and to know
Oh
how
yeah,
things are implemented, what can be done, and almost become best friends with engineers. Like that's something I feel like making sure that you are, understanding each other and developing the trust, in my opinion, is like one of the key things. Because at the
yeah.
end of the day, like what I'm personally like one of the most frustrating things is to just have a stack of great Figma prototypes that never make it out into the world for one reason or another. I feel like the work is kind of done, quote unquote, only when we can actually put it out there into the real world, which means that it needs to be implemented.
I agree. And I don't think it's now. I think it's always been like that.
Yeah.
I can tell you even more. Just like there are so many things that designers need to consider about development that I don't think it's even worth going in. There are like 100 things that designers should know about development and should collaborate with developers. And just one thing out of those 100, just to give you an example, when I was at FI, I remember I never was concerned about the CMS. Like I was never like if we do a digital product, and that let's say it's just a website, just for
Hmm.
simplicity, either like a news publication, right? So how or a news publication or a website for a tech company. I was never concerned about the CMS. I wasn't even interested in how the client will be managing this content on a daily basis, like adding and modifying and publishing new things. And only when we started building things ourselves, when we started Anton Irene company, if we do build a project, we always do a custom CMS. A lot of projects that we designed and built, it's almost like there are two design phases. Like I do design the front end, and then I design a custom CMS just specifically for this project, just so it's much easier for clients to use. I'm not saying that's the right approach. There are clients where designing custom CMS is not needed, and it's much better to go with something like out of the box, like things like Wagtail or maybe like WordPress, whatever the CMS solutions are there. There are some clients that would benefit from a custom CMS, so it really depends on the context. But my point is that the moment I started designing CMS and figuring out what every single input field is responsible for on the front end, my design approach changed. I remember I would put like text all over the place, like it's kind of aligned in a weird way. There are like all these things. And then the moment you start changing those things in whatever CMS, the layout breaks or things don't look as solid as they were designed. So my approach just to the design change just with this one item is just considering how exactly the client or the user, whoever it is, are going to be using this product. Like how are they going to be publishing new things and how it looks in the front end. Just like that changed my design process. And as I mentioned, on top of that, there are other 100 things that also changed my design process.
What does your day look like? Like, do you have any strategy or do you just dedicate yourself to working, from the morning until the night?
I wouldn't say my day looks much different from other designers. I do start working around 8:30. I do set a goal. Like there's this, and this I need to be doing today. I'm extremely productive if I'm focused on one or two things, and I'm extremely unproductive if I have to do 20 different things. I try to schedule my day even if there's something urgent that needs to be done that requires a lot of thinking, I would rather schedule to do it for the next day and just know that tomorrow is going to be dedicated to figuring out this task. So the only way I'm being productive is I'm trying not you know how they say, eat elephant in pieces. It's like, this is the thing that I'm trying to focus on today. I'm not going to be distracted by anything else. And I will do whatever I can to figure out this one thing. And then tomorrow I'll move to something else. So that's the only way I'm being productive. I wouldn't say I work all the way until the midnight. Obviously not.
What would be an example like of the goal that you set? What do you typically jot down?
Okay, be anything. I mean, if I'm working on a project and I have my own kind of timeline of what needs to be done when, so that can be figuring out an entire layout in the application and then like trying to get at least version one ready today, something that I can talk about with the rest of the team or with the client. So it's done. That can be responding to RFP, just going through the document, compiling a list of questions, and that can be scope a project. Like today, I'm going to be scoping a project in great detail, and I'm going to spend the rest of the day just focusing on that task or anything really. Is like from design to management.
And you typically work, like typically you have one main project at a time, or do you have multiple things happening at once? And you like, do you ever break up the day into multiple projects, or you mentioned that you kind of try to focus on just one at a time, within a day?
Yeah, I mean, there are instances where I have to. It really depends on how we get projects. A lot of times when we do have more than one project happening at the same time, there are going to be at different stages. So let's say we are starting a new project and there is a lot of concepts and ideation that needs to happen. But at the same time, there is another project, but it's already in development phase, or maybe it's nearly like end of design phase. So of course, in this case, I can still easily break things into chunks and then focus on one thing, then another. But I don't remember last time we had two projects that started at the same time where we have to do brainstorming for both of them. So projects do overlay, but they're usually on different levels of completion. And in this case, it's much easier to kind of jump from one to another.
Got it. And actually, I wanted to share your website for a minute. Let me pull up. So, this is your personal website. For anyone who hasn't seen yet, please check it out. Anton has a lot of, yeah, just a huge collection of work and personal projects. One thing, I was looking through this earlier today, and I didn't notice it before, but so if you scroll all the way down through all this great stuff, there is one item here that you can click on, and it's a clock. Have you done
No one's
something?
seen that except you. You're the only person that
Really?
found it. Yeah, I think so.
That's funny. I never clicked on it until today, and I was like, wow, this is like a great metaphor. I wonder if you built it for yourself or, you know, kind of as an Easter egg. But I mean, kind of talking about the productivity, you know, the clock is always running. So you try to get something done every day. It's pretty remarkable. You're also really great at engaging in a lot of personal projects and explorations and learnings. And not only that you learn, then you put it and make it into the case, right? And you share it with the world. And I mean, that requires discipline and desire to do it. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like what sort of drives you to have this constant exploration, putting things together and sharing it out there, even if it's like not a commercial case study?
Sure. Most of the things that you see on this website, on the personal one, those are just, as you mentioned, they're just explorations. They're just things that I want to try out and things that I want to explore. And I don't even know, I have no idea whether they're going to be good or not. And the one thing I want to also be careful about productivity is that when you look on this particular website, which is personal explorations, and then you see a lot of JPEGs, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm very productive because those are not real projects. Like I didn't spend time building them, developing them, collaborating with other people. Some I did. So maybe every 10th project would actually be a real project that I spent time collaborating with developers and building it and it's launched. But most of them, let's just say they're JPEGs. And a large amount of JPEGs might create an illusion of productivity. And that's something that I just want to be super mindful of. So, but everything that you see on Anton and Irene website, those are the things that took a lot of time to build. So it actually, we had to collaborate with people, we had to build it, we had to launch it, and be that a client project or personal project. Now, about the reason why I create them, I think there are just a million different reasons. Sometimes it's a way to meditate. Sometimes it's a way to get distracted. So there are several projects here that I just make because they take a lot of time to make, and I would just get distracted from either problems that I have right now or maybe a very boring project that I have to be working on with the client. It's just a way for me to kind of step away. Some people play video games, some people might read books, but I would just sit down and kind of stretch buildings, and like spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to do it. A lot of these projects are done to learn new skills. So, for example, at some point we were doing One Shared House. It's an interactive documentary that we built as our first studio uh, self-initiated project, and I needed to learn After Effects. So some of the projects that you see on my portfolio, I actually create them in need to learn the new tool. Same with
Mm-hmm.
3D. So I don't want to follow a YouTube tutorial on 3D and just end up designing a baby Yoda. Like like most of the tutorials are like, okay, I'm gonna come up with a chair and then I'm gonna search for necessary YouTube tutorials that will help me to model and render that chair. So a lot of the projects on my personal website are just actually learning new tools and testing things out. Um, a lot of which I then apply when I do client work.
Yeah, I mean, you sound very humble about that. It's just JPEGs. I mean, some of this,
Yes,
you
this
know,
one in the middle, it took 10 years to make. The
yeah,
watch.
the watch I wanted to talk maybe about separately, but yeah, a lot of this, like you go in and it's definitely it's a concept. Sure, it may not be the skateboard maybe have not
Skateboard with
done.
square wheels. Why not?
Yeah, but
It's
still,
like I would
um,
definitely buy one of those things.
yeah. Do you have instances when someone like reaches out to you, like they see one of the concepts, like, oh wow, Anton, like this is great. Let's build it, or let's make it.
Uh, it happens sometimes, yeah. There are instances where I take it. Most of the time, no. I mean, a lot of times there were a couple of projects that I put out. I don't remember which ones. I would have people reach out as like, hey, let's build it together. But I just realized that it's such a huge project. It's like getting into this, it's like a second job. Like, do I want to have a second job? Not sure. So I just reply that, like it seems like it's too big of a thing for me to take on now as a personal project. Sometimes they sometimes whoever replies, like I would say, sure, let's do it. So for example, there is one app in somewhere in the sea of this project which is called Color Match. So I designed a concept of the app that basically it's just a fun game where I would show you color, and then you have to you have to memorize this color and then find it on a color palette and see how far you're off. And then there was this guy who's a sysadmin on a radio station, and he wrote to me that he is um, learning iOS on the like watching tutorials, like learning how to build apps, like almost like a book. And then like, oh, the concept looks cool, let's build it. And then we actually spent time building it, and I think it's still live. I haven't checked.
What is your main design tool these days, or like several key? Like, do you use? I mean, I'm sure you use Photoshop still. Um, do you use Figma as well?
Anything to do with interface interaction design, I'm going to use Figma, of course, but I do use Photoshop for image editing and image manipulation, or when I'm preparing particular assets that I want to bring into Figma, of course, I'm going to use Photoshop and Lightroom.
What type of projects clients come to you these days to Anton and Irene? Like, what are you most excited to work on, and what kind of inquiries do you usually get?
I wouldn't say there is one particular genre. or section of clients, different clients. It can be tech companies,
Mm-hmm.
companies like Google or companies like Spotify. That can be cultural institutions, things like museums. We work with them quite a lot too. Can be just individual designers, things like we did for Chantel Martin or Karim Rashid. The companies that produce physical products, so like a lighting company that we work with, Zumtobel in Austria, or Mark Forst, which is a 3D printing company that makes this industrial 3D printers. It can be anything really. So I'm 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 not sure we are known for one particular sort of genre of clients, or anybody who wants to reach out to us, they reach out to us.
Circling back a little bit to the personal project, you mentioned that it's a form of like meditation or stress relief. So like you basically would have a full day of work, doing something commercial, specifically for the client, and then you would kind of open whatever tool and do something for personal exploration reasons. Is that typically how that works?
Yeah, I have some kind of ongoing projects that I'm working on, like personal projects in a way where I'm personally just doing them, because we do have also self-initiated projects that we do together with Irene as part of our
Mm-hmm.
studio. We're working on one right now. Um, but about the projects that are personal, so on the website, for example, all the way at the top, there was this series that I'm working for the past couple of years, which is called Time Stretched, where I'm just finding the right image. So sometimes I would go and take images particularly for the project. Sometimes I look at the older images in my library and it can, you know what, I want to try out something with this. So that's definitely almost like a meditation of creating those artworks just for the sake of making them, just for the sake of creating something beautiful that doesn't respond to any brief or doesn't do anything more than I just enjoy working on them. Yeah, you're right. I mean, sometimes can be at the end of the day. Sometimes that can be on a weekend. Sometimes I'm not doing anything. Sometimes I am just reading books or going around and taking pictures or traveling. And then as I come up with an idea, I always write them down. I have a lot of different notebooks. I use Notion extensively to record all the ideas and to kind of store them in one place. There are times when I open it and I revisit and I'm seeing, okay, maybe I should start developing and looking into a particular thing that I came up with a while ago. It doesn't have any deadlines, there are no requirements. It's just basically a way of being creative, or like if I have something visually to tell people, I would do that. Like there are authors, there are like
Mm-hmm.
speakers or musicians, like if they want to communicate something to the world, that they're going to do it through music, they're going to do it through writing. Like sometimes if I have something to say visually, like I would just create an image, create a visual, and then put it out there.
You mentioned the watch. You basically designed and built the whole watch, and you mentioned that it took 10 years or
Well,
something like that.
between coming up with the idea and being able to sell it, 10 years, but it doesn't mean that I've been working on it for 10 years.
Right, right, right. Like what inspired you to try it? Like, was it, are you into watches? Like, I recently, like, I never really cared about watches too much until maybe a year ago, and I started to dive into, and it's like it's a whole world, super exciting, lots of details, and like, were you into watches before that, or or how did you start working on it?
On some ways, an accidental idea. I thought I'm into watches, but I'm not. I'm into visualizing time. Like that, I am into. Everything to do with time and how people see time, that I'm obsessed with. And there's a huge amount of other personal projects that are all around the topics of time. Now, watches and watch faces fall into that category. Like I wouldn't know much about watches. Like I wouldn't tell the difference between a Rolex and whatever other expensive thing. I have no idea. But I am fascinated by how people visualize time. And it's like a big passion of mine. Like I have a lot of projects. I'm actually trying to do some research on that. Actually, I do have a huge board in Notion where I collect all examples of people visualizing time and importance of time. And that's not only watches. It's like the the clock towers, the clock paintings. There's like so many different things about how people perceive time visually. I am obsessed with that, and I do collect that, and I'm trying to kind of create a research around this. Not sure what the outcome of that research will be, but I am working on it on and off. About this watch particularly, it's just an idea came from an inversion almost. Like when we think about just a composition of the watch face, or let's call it a layout, usually you show time on the edges of the watch face. That's where usually your numbers are going to
Right.
be, right? Like
Right.
if you're using a dial, like if it's not an electronic watch. And I somehow was thinking, okay, usually the numbers are on the edges. And then when you look at the time, it's like, on one side, you see like the hour. On another side, you would see where the hand is going to be pointing into the minute. And I thought, like, what if I almost like invert it and do it where the time is being presented in the middle of the screen rather than on the edges? And it's somehow like this thing came to mind at some point. It's just having two dials, one representing time, another representing minutes, and then they meet in the middle where they would show time. Because the reality is that both of these dials, that's a regular sort of the watch movement.
Right.
Like
Mm-hmm.
I can just attach hand to one at the top and hand to one at the bottom. And I am using regular watch movements. They're just two independent ones. They require two separate batteries because they're not talking to each other. Because
Mm.
apparently the mechanism that would kind of separate the two did not exist off the shelf. And in order to build a new one, it's going to take forever and it's going to be very, very expensive. So the solution was to actually use two independent movements and just basically put them, next to each other. That's why there are two crowns. You see one at the bottom, the crown to change the minutes, and there
Mm-hmm.
is another crown at the top
Mm.
to change the hours. Because usually it's just one movement where, you know, they're both kind of hands and minutes are on top of each other. But in order to separate them, in our case, had to be two different movements.
Yeah, this is super interesting. Did the watch community notice this piece? Like, did you get some attention from the watch enthusiasts?
I don't think with I don't think so. It didn't make a lot of noise in the watch community. No, barely. I would say like some blogs did publish it, like watch specific blogs or some watch specific publications like here and there, but not. I wouldn't say a lot. The reality is that we're not a watch company, and a lot of these publications they really focus on like it. At least to me, it felt they focus more on a watch company rather than on the timepieces by themselves. Like, and we're not competing with a watch company. We just made one piece, and we only made a 500 of these, so it's a
Mm-hmm.
very small run. But the one thing who matters, in my opinion, in my personal opinion, the who noticed it was the MoMA Museum, and they
Mm.
bought. I don't remember if I'm even allowed to say, so we'll cut this part out. So they bought a good portion of our stock. Let's put it this way, to sell at the MoMA Design Store in New York. And to me,
Mm-hmm.
that was like, okay, that's nice. Like I felt
Yeah.
it felt great to as being a digital designer that only designs things that are somewhat tangible to go into a MoMA design store in New York and seeing your thing there with your name. That felt great. Not gonna lie
Yeah,
about
no, for
that.
sure. I think it's a fascinating design. Like, actually, I didn't know that there is two crowns. Like, watch community is super peculiar. Like, a lot of people are actually in the watch community. They're like all about the dial. It's kind of like a special type. Would you do another one, or like, did you learn that it's been too painful of a
That's
process?
it's really really painful. I don't even want to get into that. That's like a topic for a
Yeah,
separate
yeah.
conversation. Things I learned and things I suffered, and it's like, ugh, if if I have to do it again, I don't know. There was another thing you asked me earlier. What motivates me
Yes.
to do those things and finish? And I'll tell you, there's another thing that motivates me. I have a personality, and that's like I don't know if it's a good trait or a bad trait. If I spend a significant amount of time doing something, I feel bad abandoning it.
Mm,
So I would do whatever it takes to finish it
mm,
in whatever shape or form. And that's, I'm not saying it's a good thing or bad thing. Again, depends on how you look at it. I'm also the type of person, if I don't like the book, I'm going to finish it. I think it's a bad
Mm.
thing. Like I would rather not lose time and start something new. But if I'm reading a book and I'm halfway through, I'm not going to abandon it. If I'm in the first chapter and I smell bullshit, I'm not going to continue reading it, of course. But if I spend half of the book, I'm not going to, it's like, okay, like maybe something is going to happen at the end and I have to finish it. And it's kind of same with work. So the watch is a very good example. At some point, when I look back and I saw how much time I spent, like getting the first engineer, helping do the first prototype, building the first prototype by hand, so with the engineer, getting another engineer, like redoing everything for sort of mass production. And then at some point I look back and it's like, I've invested so much time. And at some point you can also have invested a lot of money that I would rather just finish things. Like it feels bad abandoning all this process. Again, maybe I should learn to abandon things and just to kind of take the knowledge and not finish it, not waste time finishing something, but figuring out what exactly I learned and take it with me and start a new thing. So I'm not saying do it like me. I'm just saying that sometimes I think that it's more of a bad trait than a good trait. But
I mean,
it did generate a lot of random things. Yes.
yeah, I mean, I think it's great in some way that it's like it in the ideal world you would want to be able to like easily control the switches of like when you
Yeah.
know click drop, but at the same time, I mean, not to not to play your therapist, but to some extent like maybe uh putting things out there, right? Like you start something, you explore, and that creating a page for it, putting it out there, it's almost like a process of like, okay, I can be finished with this part, I move on,
Yeah.
even if it's not, it's kind of like a part of the completion. I've been consciously learning to sort of invest into things more and carry them through. Like I almost sometimes have another opposite flip of that. Sometimes I would start something, I would learn, I would lose interest, and I'm like, okay, I understood that, I already know how it works, and I'm no longer as excited. And
Mhm.
then that results like in me spending time learning, doing, but I have actually nothing to show for it. I've been like the last, I don't know, X amount of years kind of consciously trying to, okay, let's try to organize it and bring together. I guess it is about like just different mindsets, and like we all have our different um traits, so to speak, the mental traits with
Yeah,
pros
that's
and
totally
cons.
different because there are sometimes I find myself working on a weekend, kind of redoing a personal image that I've been working for the 10th time and just wanted to finish it and be done with it. And at the same time, I'm thinking, like, why am I not on my bike right now? Like, why am I not reading that book? Like, why am I not doing all those things I could have been doing? And instead, I'm just there, like, trying to finish this thing that I don't think I'm not even sure I should be finishing, but yet there is this like thing in my head, like if I'll finish it, I can then forget about it. Like then I don't need
Yeah.
to worry about it. So
Talking about finishing, actually, one of the questions I had for you is how do you know, how do you determine when something is finished, quote unquote, in a sense of getting it to a certain state that you are like happy with? Like if somebody was to try to dissect it, right? Like, is it a set of like mental checkpoints, or is it purely based on intuition and you're like, you're just trying to get it to the point where like, well, it feels right, I will pass it on? Have you thought about it? Like, do you have any mental process that you go through to understand like, okay, I got this design to a point where I believe it's good for it to like see the light of day?
that's a really good question. And I think that's a question I don't have answer to. There's maybe one answer there. If I look at something that I worked on and I ask myself, if I'm going to spend another day or another week on it, will it become better? And when the
Mm.
answer is no, it's done.
Mm.
It's like, I know
That
that can I spend another week on it? I can. Is it going to be much better? Not for me, but for whoever I'm creating it. If the answer is no, then I think it's done.
that's a good one. Yeah.
I just came up with it.
Well.
Because
think
nobody ever asked me about that. So
I mean, to be honest, like, yeah, it's kind of like a weird question to ask. Like, nobody asked me that either, right? And it's like I was thinking about it the other day.
so
Like,
when do you think it's ready?
yeah, that's the good question. Um, I think for me, part of it is there is some sort of like a click, like let's say in my own process, I'm much more focused on the UX tool building. Like I live in the realm of complicated workflows, and right now I'm in the healthcare. It's a bit of a different, like a very unique environment. Usually there is a lot of inputs, a bunch of variables. I'm trying to get it to the part where things start to make sense as a system overall. I have an easy explanation for how things are meant to be and meant to operate. And there is a clear relationship between them, something like that. Do you personally spend a lot of time looking through other people work, or I don't know, what are your sources of I don't know, I don't want to call it inspiration, but like, do you generally look through the industry and things out there, or not really anymore?
Not really, but then at the same time, yes. Like I'm not looking at people's portfolios anymore as I used to when I had to hire people. But I do look at, when there's a new thing is being introduced, right? There are like tons of different random AI devices, and like people are talking about them. Like, yeah, I would go to the website and like look at the website, try and read about it, try to understand how it looks and how it works. If there's a new product introduce like a new app or something that's creating some waves, like I'm gonna download it and check it out and see like what the buzz is about. So in some sense, sure, I would follow just so I can understand, what's happening right now. But I'm not doing it to the level where I, browse designers' portfolios. Like I don't remember last time I did that. I mean, I do visit a lot of exhibitions here in New York. There are always something going on in that sense. Like I do read a lot of books. I do read industry sort of related books that I find interesting, or just like regular fiction books. Traveling is a huge inspiration for me. I know you recently went to Japan. I don't think
Yeah,
even once, right? Like I think you went there like so
twice this year. Yeah,
twice
well, not
exactly.
this year, last year. Yeah.
Same to me. Like I was there twice last year, and definitely like seeing something new just from like traveling and looking at things is inspirational. I mean, it just comes from various sources, but not by looking at others people work really.
One topic that we didn't touch on, but I was curious to get your take, is design and AI. It's a hot topic these days. Like,
It's
have
a hot
you?
and the most boring topic these days.
Yeah, tell me why it's boring. Tell me why it's hot. Yeah.
I mean,
What,
it's
what's your?
hot because it's hot, I guess, because everyone is discussing it. It's boring because I think it's in some ways unpredictable in a near future. In a long term, I don't know what's going to happen. Of course, like if AI is going to replace all the designer jobs, I guess so at some point. Like, are we talking about 5 years, 10 years, 15 or 20 or 1 year? I have no idea. Like, I don't even spend time thinking about this. I might sound like a dinosaur who is going to get replaced by AI because I'm not so concerned about this right now, probably. But at the same time, it might take more time than we think. I've been listening to, again, since that topic is so prevalent in social media or in other podcasts. I heard people talk about how it's going to replace everybody within a year. So designers are not going to exist within a year. I've heard other people saying it's not going to replace for another 10 years. The reason why I'm saying it's boring because it's such a wide range of opinions. Like I'm not an expert in AI. I don't work on it. I don't spend time researching it. So, but when I hear all these experts, they're giving us such wild estimates. What am I supposed to do with the prediction that I'm going to be, replaced by AI next year, and the prediction that I'm not going to be replaced by AI even in 20 years, like, and everything in between. And that's why I'm saying it's boring because the spectrum of opinions is so wide on it. And it's to the point where I don't really
Yeah.
care who I should be listening to.
Have you tried to use like, do you use any of the AI tools these days? I mean,
Yeah.
do you use ChatGPT or?
Yeah. I use AI a lot. I use AI for writing, not for writing, but for editing writing. I do use AI a lot for searching because you cannot Google today anything. Like if you're searching something on Google that isn't meant to be translated into purchase, meaning that I'm not looking for something to buy or rent, Google is completely useless. If I'm searching for a book or a quote or something, I would always get the first 100 links about where to buy this book across like different like e-commerce markets. But I'm only looking for a quote or I'm only looking for a specific thing about that. So Google became completely useless because today, if you're searching something that you want to know, it's like every single link is going to make you try and buy something because Google is going to make money on it. And I think AI is also going to become useless at some point. One of the things that's like, I think is a little bit, is kind of bad is the search engine optimization. You know, it's like how people create this websites, not for humans to be consumed, but for
Mhm.
Google engine to be consumed accurately. I think we're at this very good moment right now with AI, or at least with ChatGPT, where it's not broken like that, because at some point it's also going to be like people are going to hack all the systems that they're going to be as unusable maybe as Google is right now in general. But
Yeah.
when it comes to searching or doing research, I use it a lot. Like, okay, what this writer said about this, and this, and this, and it's going to give me a very precise answer that Google will never be able to do that. Or like in which articles or in which research or where this and this and this has been mentioned by which authors. And it can compile. I have to double check everything, of course, but as a starting point, obviously it's amazing.
Yeah. Have you tried any of the like design specific tools? Kind of like type a prompt, get,
Yeah. Yeah.
what?
Everything that I tried is usually I wasn't impressed by. Um,
Yeah.
Everything that I tried in terms of like, oh, we're gonna build a website for you. It's like it doesn't matter which prompt you give, it kind of gives you a template with slightly different colors.
Yeah.
It's like the result is always kind of the same. And I have a feeling it's not 100% AI, is that there's some kind of template or some kind of foundation designed by humans sits behind it, and AI is, like throwing random texts and maybe randomly selects like a color or something like that.
Yeah.
And then like with
Yeah.
image generation is the same. It's like I know some people can become really good at describing there's like this like prompt engineer nonsense and things like this, but I haven't been, I would say, like super impressed with design AI for now.
Yeah, for design specifically, everything that I tried feels like very pedestrian, like build a e-commerce website, to sell, shoes or whatever. Sure, like for that, maybe it's okay, like have some basic wireframes, but technically you can, create it. But
I mean, it will become
yeah.
it will become good at some point doing those things, and I think we need those things. I always bring up this example is that imagine back in like early 2000s, if you are a restaurant and you needed a website, you really needed to find someone who knew how to do it, who knew how to
Hmm.
somewhat design it, write code, figure out like a hosting and the server and like deploy it. And like it wasn't easy. And at some point, all the social media, in my opinion, I would put it quote unquote, took jobs from designers, but nobody complained. Because now, if you're a restaurant, you don't really need a website. As long as you're on Google Maps, as long
Hmm.
as you're at all the local, like delivery services and apps for booking tables and things like this. Like, I don't remember when was the last time I was on a website of a restaurant, but I definitely looked for them on Google. I definitely read the reviews and other apps. I definitely booked the table through another set of apps. So as long as you exist in all these ecosystems as a restaurant, you don't need a website. And I've never heard a single designer complain that, oh, now I don't have restaurant websites to design. If you're a barbershop, if you're a little bookshop, if you're a little, the social media and all these platforms, they took away so many jobs from designers, but nobody kind of really bothered. And then there was another wave with all this like templated platforms, like Squarespace and Wix.com. And I think that's good. I mean, not everything needs to be customly designed. Not everything needs a designer as a person with opinion to come and sort it out. A lot of times people just want to snap their finger and have something online, whatever that is. And I think that's good. And the fact that
Yeah.
AI will be able to do it very quickly, I think that's good. Let it.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think that also in the future, the more and like, I think that what AI it is not going to be able to do, at least not right away, is taking ownership and responsibility over selection. And I personally feel that this is where like the human part uh, is going to be
I don't know,
important. Is
man.
like,
If I take two pictures and I ask AI which one is better, I'm pretty sure it's gonna pick one.
well, right, but who's going to, but if it was wrong, like who are you going to kind of blame, right, for the consequences? Like I guess what I'm trying to say is, um, having the experience and kind of maturity to decide which direction is right, what is better, because like basically the execution probably will become kind of commoditized to some extent. Like a lot of things you will be able to generate a lot more easily, but then selecting out of that is still the question, right? Because I feel like, you know, I don't know if there were competitions like that or not, but I'm pretty sure like if you give, the same AI tool to, someone with, great taste and an experienced designer, as opposed to just like a random person off the street, and you put a brief, like the result is probably going to be different in terms of like how you approach um, the solution. What do you even ask for it?
I mean, I guess I still think it will make selections, and it will make selection not on taste and aesthetic. It will make selection on metrics and what is being used the most across and what people click on and where people look at. I mean, those are the things it will be able pretty easily, I guess, kind of understand and then make selections based on that. Make selections on, let's say, the best practices or the most usable things over, obviously. So it will never be able to probably create something that didn't exist before because it's being trained on stuff that exists now. But I don't think people, again, as I mentioned at the very beginning, not everybody would need a bespoke solution, same way as,
Yeah.
we don't live in those bespoke architect buildings.
I have kind of one closing question, if you may. Um, what would you recommend for new, like, and beginner designers watching this, as they, enter the new field, living in this world and working in a new world, basically? I know also you do teach at Harbor, right? Like I would, maybe next time we'll talk more about that. I'm sure you talk with a lot of students. What is your general kind of recommendation of what to focus on and how to strategize the vector of development?
Oh, that's a big one. The one thing that I think is important is to understand what exactly you want to do, what exactly you think you're good at, and what exactly you're ready to spend so many hours training and becoming better. Because I have a feeling a lot of people want to become this, or that, not really knowing exactly what it means. It's like a lot of people want to become a creative director of a company. It's like, do you realize it has nothing to do with making visual design, right? Like it's like a manager job. It's like, or a lot of people want to be this like a UX designer at Google. It's like, do you realize what it is? It's like, try to have a better understanding of not being led by brands or not being kind of blinded by big names or things like this. Just try to understand what is exactly what you want to do. Like what brings you joy in becoming, like when you want to become a craftsman, and not everybody wants to. Actually, I forgot to, uh, completely off topic. There is a book called Craftsman, which is amazing, which is a research on why certain people do work just for the sake of doing work really, really good. and some people don't do it. People are different. So if you want to become a craftsman in something, just like figure out what is exactly brings you joy, like what is you're really good, and then look for opportunities there. Maybe that opportunity will not be Google, and that actually might be really good. But maybe sometimes your opportunity will be Google or another tech giant, and that will be the appropriate place for you to pursue the thing that you wanted to do. I have a feeling that sometimes a lot of young designers sometimes don't know what they want to do. I think that's the problem. It's like figuring out like what brings, like, is it research? Is it UX? Is it both? Is it design? Is it visual design? Is it interfaces? Is it all of it at the same time, from spoon to the city? Like if you can design a spoon, you should be able to design a city. So figure out what brings you joy. Like you want to do multiple things at the same time, but so there are places for that. Some people don't like doing multiple things and being multidisciplinary. They don't believe in the concept from spoon to the city. They want to specialize in one little thing. There are spaces and companies and organizations for that, but try to understand what exactly you wanted to do, because I have a feeling sometimes most people don't know. They just want to be there. What are you going to be there? I don't know what I'm going to be doing there, but I want to be there. I think that's not a really good approach.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. That was great, and thank you so much for coming on. I enjoyed the
Thank you.
conversation, and
Same
yeah,
here.
let's hope to see you more on and off camera.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.